Okay, hello everybody. It's me again, Coronavirus Summers, and we are carrying on with our series on the coronavirus that I've been doing for the last month. Yes, this is me in the flesh. And just before we get into anything, little magenta bit, little celebration bit. We've got a real camera now. The last few videos that I've done, they've been filmed with a phone. And they've been filming a laptop from a phone's perspective because of the lack of equipment I had. This has been very rushed. It's been very urgent that I've had to do this because I felt it appropriate at the time. I was in no way, shape or form ready with equipment. So now that I have got a proper camera, great times. Also, you will notice that I'm on screen, which as part of my recovery process is brilliant. But it's a very momentous occasion. So forgive me if I come across like I'm nervous or anything like that. It's just something I'm not used to right now. I have done in the past. It's been a while. And as I said, I'm going through a recovery process. I have mental health issues in case you haven't watched the other videos. And in case you haven't watched the other videos, go and watch the other videos. They're relevant to what I'm about to talk about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then we have a bit more on that. So the perception filter was the first two-parter that I did, and that was looking at the coronavirus as the media's reported on it and looking at challenging how the media may have reported it in correlation to how it probably should have been said to be more informative and fair, and also kind of the events that led up to where I was at the time of filming in terms of the coronavirus and just sort of what I saw. And then I went and did another couple more videos. I think it was probably a week or two later. And that was to do with lockdown health when the government decided to announce lockdown. And being as I'm the sort of person who is, I live quite an isolated life because of my mental health problems. I'm inside a hell of a lot. I'm outside, even when I'm outside, I do isolate myself from other people. And so having that natural resource at my disposal of how to cope and how to keep a smiley face during isolation, I felt that it was just something I could offer people. And so it was just a way to stay healthy, to stay centered, to stay positive during lockdown for as long as it lasted. And now I'm back again to talk further on stuff. We're going to be going through a couple of things, but however, I'll get this out of the way because this bit's for me. So I must be made of baby chicks. By the way, I keep coming out of my shell, I tell you, because I was not planning to do a full face image thing. You will see me in future videos because I was intending to do it at some point in correlation to the business that I wanted to set up, etc., etc. I won't go into it too much, but better to start now. Why not now than ever? I know. So, new video. Now I'm going to flip the screen because it's back to front at the moment. If I can, I believe I can. If I can't, fair enough. Either way, it's called Updates, Reflections and Questions. Basically, I'll introduce to that and then I'll introduce my method. So basically, Updates, Reflections and Questions. It's pretty much where we're at the moment. It's where I'm at and where you're at. If you're, where are we? I think we're 4 weeks in to lockdown. Some countries will have more time, some countries have less time. It's kind of where you're going to be in your mentality at the moment. You're kind of just, be running around, checking on what's going on, thinking back, and probably have quite a few questions. There are quite a few questions at this point that are definitely circulating about. But it's also relative to what I'm going to talk about. Now, the format, this is how I'm going. So I'm looking this way a lot, as you can see. This is me looking at my presentation that you'll see behind me, which I've done a little visual for people, just in case you get bored by my face. And also, I've got my notes to help me through this new process. So let's get straight to it, because as you guys know, my videos are long. This will be a two-part video. The first one now is on updates and reflections because they're they're clustered together, and the questions will follow in part two. So, updates. Well, as far as updates go, It's going to be a quick overview in terms of updates for two reasons. The first one is because the first one's personal. I'm going to elaborate on it later. And the second one is because in terms of overviews, most independent media are going to be giving you news articles, which I'm not going to. Basically, because if I gave you news articles, I'd be doing the media a service and you a disservice right now. The media has been giving us nothing but negative. In the last couple of days, I finally saw a positive article headline. But other than that, it's been nothing but terrible things. Terrible, terrible things. And so, generally speaking, this is all you've seen. This, right? Red numbers, death, despair, propaganda, and fear are four keywords to basically summarize what the media has been about. It's been terrible, it's been downcast. But I did get sick. I got coronavirus and I got over it. I had it for about a week. There are some lasting symptoms. I'll get into that more in the next video. But yeah, generally speaking, it's an interesting topic. But it's been one that has definitely had too much negative and not enough positive. Way more on that later on in the video. You'll hear me say TBC throughout the video. TBC is basically a way of just saying I'm going to speak about it later without us having to waste time. So let's carry on. Straight into reflections. So reflections, pretty much updates as well, but let's reflect on them. So first and foremost, we're looking at shopping. So in my videos before, I talked about how people were panic buying. And this is one of the things that set me off into making these videos. The fact that panic buying was going on everywhere in correlation to the fact that people had read the reports in Wuhan and have responded over here by saying, well, this is just going to kill us all, so let's go and stock up for the nuclear reactor season. And that is a good reflection because the shops started regulating it. So down here, we've got shops that have decided to do social distancing by getting people to queue up outside of the shop. 2 meters apart, we all queue up and we all go in bit by bit. As people are coming out, people go in to control the amount of people that are going in. Also, there are a number of items per item on certain overtly wanted goods. So like, for example, people are getting loads of toilet roll, loads of beans, loads of hand wash. So these things have been restricted to a limited amount of items over here. And these things have worked out brilliantly. People have just adapted to it like that. It's not been too much of a problem at all. And yeah, man, well done to the shops. And they've also advertised it on the TV, in case people missed it. Yeah, it's gone great. Panic buying, however, there's only been 2 instances where stocks, for me, visually, where stocks went low. And that was, I believe, I think it was about the second week into lockdown after the panic buying started going down. Don't quote me on weeks. It's been a weird timeline. You kind of lose days here. But I found out that wholesalers, so the people that were supplying the shops, they were running out of stock themselves, which is why certain things weren't in stores. But other than that, there was another example of panic buying that happened quite recently that I saw, and I did make my voice heard on social media about it. TBC. More on it later. But it's been a great thing. Well done, shops. Awesome. Claps for the NHS. Don't know if you can see that. It's quite bright out there, but we'll carry on. So claps for NHS happened. So what we decided, which was a beautiful thing, very positive thing, we decided that our NHS workers have been working very hard, trying to help people through sickness, through normal sickness as well, in case everybody's forgotten, people get sick all the time, and coronavirus. And so they've arranged for every Thursday at 8 o'clock at night, everyone goes out and claps for the NHS and says, well done NHS, there's been supporting messages everywhere, etc., etc. And very positive thing. Why is it positive? Is because it boosts morale and encourages unity. And however, it was a great thing to start with, and I have more of a perspective on that in part 2 of this video, because I do believe that there is some negative aspects that have occurred for clapping for NHS, and there have also been some media influences. TBC. Restrictions. So, if anyone from the UK will remember, there was a brief gasping bit just before lockdown where we were praying that the restrictions that were imposed were not going to be drastic as to keep everyone locked in the house. Some parts of the countries of the world have been isolated completely into their house with no freedom of movement. And I too was bracing for impact in that. And luckily, the Prime Minister and the government, I rate them. For once in my life, I actually rate the government. This is what they did. They decided to close down everything non-essential, but they kept open parks. And exercise, you're allowed to go out and exercise. I think it's for an hour a day, but it's nonetheless, you can go outside to exercise, for parks, for shopping. And I think it's to travel for urgent care for people. Nevertheless, freedom of movement, brilliant. We kept it. The parks, it's been a wonderful idea. People have been littering the parks. Wonderful. More on that later. But yeah, man, well done, government. Just one thing. Yes, okay, so one thing that's definitely going to be in the history books is that people got sick. Not just anybody. Prime Minister Boris Johnson got sick and Prince Charles got sick. Now, both of them got sick and recovered, but both of them had quite illustrated examples of being sick whereby they didn't just get a tiny bit sick. Both of them ended up in hospital and then both of them recovered. And what's interesting about that as a reflection is because it was shocking from the point of view of the media, but it was humanizing. And why we say that is because we don't often see the higher class vulnerable or in compromising positions where they're vulnerable relative to things that we have too. You'll see cancers and stuff like that, diseases that generally any human will get, but when a virus and stuff goes on, you don't really generally hear of the upper class or the politically important people kind of being hit at the same level as us. And so that, I think, was the reflective moment there for that. And yeah, it's just it was interesting to see. I'm going to be interested to see how we go forwards when we have a prime minister who's been directly affected by it. It might affect the type of policy that comes in, for the better or for the worst. We'll see what happens. And of course, there have been deaths. I'm not going to press too much on it, but obviously, you'll know and I'll know there'll be deaths. There's been deaths of all ages. All range of vulnerabilities. They said it was people with underlying conditions, but apparently it's been a bit more indiscriminate than that. And I'm going to just be logical here. I'm not trying to pry on somebody because I really do feel for anybody who's lost somebody genuinely to coronavirus, but it was expected, as terrible as it is. We did expect people to die when any type of influenza or any type of infection and disease goes around. We expect certain groups of people to pass away. Old people with weaker immune systems and generally at end of life stages, we expect them to do it. As horrible as it is, vulnerability is extended to pregnancy, to asthma, anything with the chest because it's a cardiovascular infection. So it's in here, anything that people have, heart issues, breathing issues. These are the ones that we expect to see get really sick. This is a test of the immune system, though, not a test of underlying conditions. In my perspective, more on that later. But it happened, yes. So the good news on that, and there is good news, is that there were far less deaths than were predicted. So they, for some mad reason, I don't know why, they turned around. I think it was to do with the Agenda 201 conference. I'm not going to cover that at all right now. But they came out and said millions of people would die as a fact. And I think this is what has triggered off most of the horrifying things, horrifying images, horrifying perceptions, horrifying all stuff. But it hasn't happened. The deaths have been numbered, but relatively low in proportion to the global population. At the moment, it's something like 100,000 or 150,000. And by the way, with over 200 countries being affected by this, you're definitely factoring at least 6 billion people. 6 billion people. 100,000. Again, terrible, but we're being cold with the figures here and saying that it's definitely lower than we thought. And then the usual and foreseen. If you can see it, you can see it. If not, it doesn't matter. I'm going to read it to you. We're just going to skim over them because I'm trying to keep the proportions of these video short. So we had the usual unforeseen, which is the things that you would expect to see with anything that's like any kind of infection, any kind of disease, anything that spreads around. This is what we see all the time with them. So there were more reports on worldwide spread. Obviously, it went from country to country, You know how these things go. The most monumental point of it will be that it went to so many countries because a lot of others tend to peak in different places of the world. But this is like kind of universal, just, went everywhere. Things were being cancelled. Events, obviously we all saw this come in. So like, I think the Olympics, I don't know if we're going to have the Olympics this year. So far, I imagine we will, maybe, but plenty of other things have been cancelled in the meantime. We expected that. Lockdown, how were people going to have social events? Tons of recovery rates. There's a TBC on that because we're going into that later, but the point is there were massive recovery rates. We knew there were going to be recovery rates because this is not a disease that's universally killing everybody, and in fact, it's fundamentally loads lower from deaths to recoveries. Social media explosions, which I did try and warn against, but obviously nobody's really watched these videos. I don't mind. But warning about, even like not just myself, but it should be sensible to any person that they might want to avoid internet addiction. Because the last thing you want to do when you're crammed into a tight space without too much freedom of movement day to day is go on the internet and stay on the internet, because the internet is a very toxic place. People who tell you different probably are the toxic ones. But yeah, social media explosions, like people went nuts all over Twitter, etc, etc. I've tried to stay away from it. I'm only going online to tweet for like 5 minutes and I'm off. That's it. I might glance at a news article as I go past, but I'm not really interested, because at this point, at the start, I was more interested to know my facts, but now I have enough facts to know what I need to know. The rest of it's just going to be dramatization and updates is going to come on the TV anyway. Not the news, by the way. I'm not watching the news. I'm talking the adverts. So coronavirus advertising. I'm going to get to that later. I'm not even going to begin to go in coronavirus advertising because it really annoys me, the advertising system. Obviously, we had some good ones. So we had like some government ones, which, despite the content, the point is that they were actually advertising it. And I suppose that's important at the base level. Businesses and products and charities, though, and yes, I said charities as well. I don't blame the charities, by the way. It's just a case of when you have a product that you're trying to push, or if you have a service you're trying to push, the way you incorporate coronavirus into it really matters at this point, and I think it does, because if you're in a state and height of panic due to any kind of anything, any infection, any whatever, you really want to be careful with your advertising methods and what you're trying to get people to buy or invest in, because I'm sorry, that's what advertising is. We can say that they're making these videos about people doing clips of nice things for sentimental values, but they're not. They are, but they're not. They're still telling you to use their products. And there's been certain businesses that have just taken that too far. The charities haven't, but just to touch on the charities there, more on this later kind of thing, charities are asking us for money for coronavirus, which they're entitled to. Of course, always, that's how charity has worked. But I can't believe that in the midst of coronavirus pandemic, that the government hasn't already catered to the charities to the point where they shouldn't have to be on TV asking us for £10 a month. If the economy stopped and nobody's working anymore, how is it that they expect us to pay money to charities and other such things with money that we're trying to not run out of because we can't go to work? So obviously, my way of thinking is that the charities and all these different types of things they're asking you to give money to are aiming at the people who are poor, because they're the ones who are getting benefits, who have the accumulated steady income to give back. And I think that that's okay, but I think the economy is so uncertain right now, and things are so uncertain right now that and panic buying and stuff has happened. I probably would have hesitated to as a government. Not as businesses, but as a government, I would have hesitated not hesitated. As a government, I would have been forthcoming in making sure, especially charities and that, had enough funding right now, because they'd be the people like the NHS who are at the front line helping people out. And finally, as we come to the 20-minute mark, so I will finish it here because we're pretty much at the question point. We had the economy becoming uncertain, which I've just brushed on, which was obviously going to be seen. If you stop all things and everything around, of course the economy is going to stop because nobody's getting paid and nobody's paying anything. So, stocks and bonds and, all of that newspaper mentality stuff. Newspaper, top hat, Mr. Monopoly. Right. And yeah, just the other week, we had something that happened for the first time in history. The American oil stock market plunged into a negative. In other words, the value of oil in America went below $0 per whatever. It went down to minus $50 per, let's say, litre in this country or whatever. Don't quote me on the measurement. But it was going to happen because obviously nobody's using vast quantities of oil anymore. We're not driving. Well, I'll say it again. We're not driving as much. We're not flying as much. Ships as much. You know what I mean? Cargo. Like, people aren't buying stuff as much. You think there's a balance in buying. I'll get back to that one. But yeah, it's a terrible thing, I suppose, for economies to be uncertain. But as far as American oil goes, I will say this on camera, that it tickles me a bit. I did giggle to myself, just the smallest bit. I feel sorry for the Americans, I really do. But I giggled at the oil thing, and the reason why is because if you're listening, or American government and army, if you're going to go around different countries starting wars or getting involved in wars and then extracting loads of oil from different countries and trying to find different ways to cultivate the oil into petrodollar, etc., karma's going to come. And so, even though it didn't last very long, it lasted for a day. I don't know what it's like now because I haven't checked on it, but I just think that people need to really talk about resources, because we spoke a lot about the ways and means of solar power, wind power, electricity, etc., and oil has always been a very controversial issue. So next up, we've got the questions. Questions are going to come. Sorry, I'm just sitting in front of the TV. So the questions are going to come in part 2, and stick around for that. And we'll get into them. And the types of questions that we're going to be asking are going to be some very interesting ones for, I believe, any type of person watching this. So yeah, thanks, and see you soon.